It is 2:00 and we are here. It is actually 2:01 and we are so lucky to be here with a number of people who are going to talk to us about E-rate today in some of the most fun ways possible. I know our conversation about this was so exciting and so much fun that I can't wait to dive right in. So we have, and I'm going to do this, David Sanders from Mesa. We have Nick Nick, pronounce your last name for me.
McGann.
McGann. See, I do it wrong every time from Buckeye Union. We've got Emily Marshall and Mark Green from Vail, Diana Hawari from Dysart, and then EJ Nicely from Nicely Done Consulting. They are going to talk to us about all the joys of E-rate. One of the things we did when we had our prep conversation was we spent some time talking about, like, why are we even having this conversation? I know Diana brought the idea up back in when, I don't know, like June. She's like, we should talk E-rate. And the silence in the room was thundering. Like nobody was up for this conversation.
It's exciting.
You have taught me through the past, prep conversations that we've had on this exactly how exciting it is. And you are absolutely right. So super fun. I think we should just dive right in. Diana, do you have a direction that you'd like us to take as we dive in?
I wanted to bring it so for those of us that use E-rate every year, many of us work with Ernie. We've known everybody in the Valley should know of Nicely Done or in Arizona. But for those of us that use E-rate every year, and then for those that are thinking of using E-rate, not sure that they have E-rate funds, wanted to bring together, the professionals, the ones that know, to have this discussion so it can help those veteran users and some that are not sure if they get funding or not. So I was thinking maybe, EJ, if you wanted to start off with what is E-rate and where the money comes from?
Hopefully you can see that now.
It is coming up. Is this going to be something that we can share out, EJ, with the
yes,
with everybody later?
Fact,
because it's such a nice tool. Right now I'm not seeing it. Is anybody else?
No.
I'm seeing EJ has started screen sharing. Can you unshare and share back up to see if that works?
It says screen sharing is paused.
Screen sharing is paused.
Resume. Yeah. Let's see. I have a resume option, but it doesn't seem to be doing anything.
I can steal the share while you stop. So as you're getting that together, it was really neat because we were talking about what would actually go into some sort of a visual that we would want to share. And EJ had so much information that I think it was almost a little bit of a challenge for you to condense it down to something that could go into a 1-hour webinar, right? It's coming up now.
Is it?
Yep.
Yep. Looks absolutely fantastic. We got your what is E-rate?
Good. Yeah. So this, Laura, I think I sent you a link in the email that you can put that in the chat if you want. This PowerPoint presentation. It's only 3 slides.
Awesome.
But that is a publicly accessible link. If you want to post that in the chat, everybody can download this to have. And yeah, so we just put a couple of points on here just kind of as an intro. If you look on the very bottom, if I jump to the very bottom bullet point, I'm going to be over in David Sanders' neighborhood in a few weeks, and we are teaching a class for ASBO on E-rate. So if you want to do a full day, you can go to asbo.org and register for that.
Can I give you a little plug for that? Just even if you've done E-rate for the last 20 years, it's always good. I always find more information when I sit through, especially one of the Nicely Done trainings. There's changes. You want to talk about all the stuff that's coming down. It's just a good opportunity to learn more about E-rate. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, and a lot of it comes from the people that are in the class and their questions and real life experiences that we then talk about. So yeah, it's usually something new every time. But anyway, it'll be fun. You get lunch and you get to go to sunny Mesa. But yeah, so you can download this slideshow. We'll go through it. If we want to talk about what is E-rate at its heart, it's a discount program. It is not a grant. It is, there's some debate whether or not it's actually federal funding. This is not part of any budget, no congressional budget. It is paid for by the Universal Service Fund, which is part of everybody's phone bill. And it goes into a big pot that is then shared out to schools and libraries for E-rate. But then there's also 3 other programs that take part in this nationally for broadband and healthcare and things like that. But it is a discount program. So you get a discount on the services and the equipment that you buy. And what can you buy with E-rate? So there's 2 categories of services. There's category 1, which is basically your bandwidth. It is connectivity to the school or to the school district or library. And then category 2 is network equipment, wireless LAN, firewall, cabling. It's connectivity within the school, within the building. So that's the main distinction between them. We have a filing window. So that filing window, there's a finite period that we can actually file for funding. And that is usually between January and March. It's usually not announced until sometime in December. So we don't know the deadlines yet. Last year, it was March 27th, I believe. And that means that's the last date that you have to file your request for funding for the next school year.
But when should you start planning for that window?
Good question. You should start planning right now. Why? Well, the process, the procurement process, takes at least 28 days to run. So when you do a Form 470, which we'll get to in a minute, but that basically has to wait 28 days while you get quotes in, a minimum of 28 days. After that period, you can then pick a winner for the service. You can pick your vendor, the cost. If you've got to take it to board, you've got to factor that in as well. So you may have to go to a board meeting to get approval for the contract. Then you file your application. So if you wait until January to start this, and you've got to wait a month even to get quotes, now you're in February, and now you've got to worry about spring break, canceling board meetings. When can I get this on the board? And you're running up against the deadline. So yeah, start as soon as you can. You can start as early as July planning for next year. Obviously, that's somewhat daunting to most people, but usually you want to start in the August, September, October timeframe. So right about now. Your discount rate, how much you actually get discounted on the services, is based mostly on your free and reduced lunch rate. So for 95% of the school districts and libraries out there, it's based on free and reduced lunch rate. It can be calculated in other ways, and those are usually one-offs, but that's what you need to know, is what is my free and reduced lunch rate. How do we find more info? I've got the website for usac.org, Universal Service Administration Company. They have a website that's got all these rules on it. Their number is there on the right side, that 800 number. That's a customer service number. So you can call that, or like I said before, you can come to our class on the 3rd. Eric Flock is on. We have a distinguished panel attendee. Eric used to work for USAC, so he is saying it's an 888 number. I thought I pulled this directly off the website. He's probably right. I think it is an 888 number. A nun called him complaining. That's funny. I'll update that number for, it is on the usac.org website. So I must have pulled an old number, but I'll update the slideshow in case anyone wants to download it.
Make the correct call to the correct number. Yeah.
Yeah. Or share your story at the other number. We mentioned this is a discount program. That discount can take one of 2 different forms. You have a BEAR, a Billed Entity Applicant Reimbursement form, where you pay your bill in full. So you'll get your internet bill, you'll pay that amount in full. and then you will file for your reimbursement, whatever your discount rate is, 90%, 80%, 70%, whatever it happens to be. And then you'll get that back into in the form of an electronic deposit that would then go into your fund 374, your accounting fund, Diana's favorite slush fund. The other option is a SPI, a service provider invoice, and that takes the form of a true discount where you only pay your percentage. You only pay your 10% or 20% of the bill, and then the vendor has to file for the reimbursement. So a lot of times we recommend, if you've got monthly bills, your internet bill, your WAN bill, those kinds of things, you should use the BEAR process for a couple of reasons. A, you don't want credits to traverse multiple fiscal years, and sometimes that can happen depending on when your funding gets approved, depending on how they apply the discounts. And I don't know if we have any service providers online or not, but service providers don't always get the BEAR or the discounts right. So if you do a discounted invoice, sometimes they screw that up, and then it takes you months to figure it out. And then that's when you start getting credits that cross over. So we recommend doing BEARs for the monthly bills. And you can submit a BEAR as often as you want. You can submit it every month, every quarter, semi-annually, annually. It depends on how quickly you want to get that cash flow.
And
for the
BEARs are
SPI,
easier for
yeah.
audits too, because
They
you
are.
have
Your
all the
auditors-
information, right?
Yeah, your auditors like the BEARs much better, definitely. What they don't like, though, is when you use Fund 374 to buy things outside of E-rate.
Yeah.
But you can, they just don't like it. SPI, service provider invoice, we recommend that for the large projects. If you're doing a wholesale wireless LAN upgrade, you don't want to pay 1.2 million out of pocket and then wait for the reimbursement. You only want to pay your percentage, pay 20% up front, have it done, and let them deal with getting the reimbursement. So that's typically how we recommend that. Or if you've got if you're putting in a wide area network with fiber construction, you also don't want to pay for that construction cost up front and wait for reimbursement. So you'll want to get a discount on that as well. How much bandwidth should we strive for? Right now, the recommendation is 1.4 megabit per student. That sounds high to most people, but it's kind of climbing. For a while, it was 1 meg per student. This 1.4 is for smaller districts. It does scale down for a larger district. They recommend less bandwidth per student, but about 1.4. So that's kind of your goal for the next few years. Theoretically, that's probably where you need to be, given all everything that's so bandwidth and cloud heavy now.
Is that
you
AJ,
can't.
is that internet? Is that internet or
That is internet. Yeah,
WAN,
wide area
okay.
network. No, WAN, they're much higher. They're saying 10 meg per student. So yeah, that's for internet bandwidth. We do have something new and exciting again. Well, it's new again. We had it for a couple of years with the state matching funds. So when we're talking about your bandwidth, and as I mentioned in the SPI section before with the construction, we have matching funds, state matching funds again this year. And what that means is if you are in a rural school district and you do not have much competition for bandwidth in that area, you can do a request for proposals, sign with a company that can then basically that construction cost would be paid by a combination of E-rate and the state. So potentially your construction, your fiber construction could be free to you using those funds. So we had state matching funds back from 2018 to roughly 2021, I believe. Then they ran out. Well, now we've got another 5 million allocated for the state. We mentioned the two categories. And again, we're running through a lot of these things really quickly. So hopefully through this discussion, we'll be able to touch on these a little more
We'll come
in
back.
depth. Yeah. Category 1 funding, like we said before, that is your bandwidth, your internet, and your wide area network. There is no limit on those funds. It costs whatever it costs. So if you are in an area that has no bandwidth and you're paying $25,000 a month for gigabit, you can get your reimbursement on that cost. If you're living in Metro Phoenix and you are paying $1,000 a month for your bandwidth, you would get whatever your discount off of that cost. So there is no other than there is the stipulation that you have to pick the most cost-effective solution if you have options. There is no limit on that funding. The Category 2 funding, however, is budgeted. And right now it's $167 per student. And this is, remember, to buy equipment or cabling, wireless LAN, firewall, UPSs, those types of things. That is budgeted, $167 per student. Whatever your enrollment happens to be, you get that lump sum for a 5-year period. You can spend it all at once. You can spread it out over 5 years. Now, we are currently planning, so 24-25 school year is the 4th year of that 5-year window. So we're right now in the 3rd year, planning for the 4th year. At the end of that 5-year period, any unused funding basically goes away and you get a brand new budget for the next 5 years. And whatever your enrollment happens to be at that point, the multiplier should go up probably around $190 per student, I would imagine, times your enrollment at that point, and you'll get that for the next 5 years. So why is that important? And keep in mind, this Category 2 funding, this budget that we're talking about, that is before your discount takes effect. So if you have a $100,000 budget and you're an 80% school district, that means E-rate will pay $80,000 of that $100,000 project. If you have a $150,000 project, E-rate will pay $80,000 of it. They'll pay 80% up to your budget, and everything after that is on you. So that's a distinction that traps a lot of people. But with this 5-year cycle, that allows you to kind of plan out your refresh cycle. If you can phase in your schools, if you have a number of schools and you want to do, elementaries over the first 2 years, middle schools the next 2, maybe high schools the 5th year, and then you can start that cycle again. That gives you the ability to plan that out. And then the last slide I have is just a bunch of key terms, and these are all terms that, as with every industry, there are acronyms and numbers that nobody knows what they mean. But these are all the things that we throw out on a daily basis. But it kind of helps. Hopefully, this is kind of your Rosetta Stone for E-rate. The Form 470, that is basically our RFP. That is what you need to start doing right now, working on that. The 471 is the application. That is what you have to file between January and March. The 472, that is your reimbursement form. The 474 is the service provider's reimbursement form. Our funding year is named opposite the fiscal years. So right now we are in funding year 2023 while you are in fiscal year 2024. So that's something to keep in mind. USAC, we mentioned Universal Service Administration Company. That's the company that administrates the program for the FCC. We have PIA, which is exactly that, Program Integrity Assurance. That is a review process that everything goes through every year. So when you file your application, it goes through this PIA process. And that can be very involved or it can be very quick. RFP is a term that in E-rate means anything that is attached to the Form 470. It can be a model number written on a napkin that we scan into the Form 470. That's an RFP according to them. So it's a little different than your procurement office will call an RFP. So you'll see that term bandied around a lot in the systems and in the emails. Just know that basically that just means any document attached to your Form 470. It can be a formal RFP, it can be a request for quote, it can be a map, it can be an equipment list, it can be any of those things or all of those things. The ACD, the allowable contract date, that is your 28-day minimum waiting period. When you post a Form 470, it is calculated as 28 calendar days from the date that you post it, the date in Eastern time zone. So if you post it at 10 p.m. in Arizona, remember you're tomorrow in the Eastern time zone. That's when your 28 days starts. That is the first date that you can evaluate your quotes and sign a contract. So if the deadline to file is March 28th and you post your Form 470 on March 1st, then you're going to be right up against the deadline. You've got to evaluate, sign your contract, file your application all in one day. An FRN, funding request number, also will come up as an FCC registration number, kind of peripherally. You have to have one of those too, but FRN is the term that we use for a funding request. Each application is going to have multiple funding requests. You can have a funding request for your internet, one for your wide area network, one for your network switches, one for your wireless LAN. They're all funding requests. A Form 486 is a very frustrating form. This is frequently a pitfall that happens to most applicants. This is the form that you file that says our service has started. Typically, it's filed on July 1st. Your internet service started on July 1st. Your wide area network started on July 1st. If you don't file the Form 486, then you cannot get funding. You have 120 days. You have 4 months to file that. So you have until the end of October to file for a service that started in July 1st. Every day after that 120 days that you miss, you're losing a day of funding on your E-rate. So a lot of times what happens is when I come into a new client, we look at those and make sure has the 486 been filed, and sometimes it hasn't, and then we have to look at appeals or what can we file for, those kinds of things. But that is a pitfall. I know they're talking about doing away with the 486. It's kind of a stopgap in that it also prevents the vendor from taking funds. So if you have a big project and they want to start sapping funds out of it, they can file a SPI request, a reimbursement request, before they've done any work. Rarely does that happen, but it can. So it's kind of a stopgap for that. It's kind of a protection, but it's also a pitfall for the applicant. CIPA, Children Internet Protection Act, you have to be compliant with it. There are multiple factors with that. We can talk about that, but you have to be compliant with CIPA in order to get E-rate funding. And then finally, a service provider identification number. That is your vendor, your service provider. That's their registration number in the E-rate system. So that was a quick and dirty.
Let's go back to the first slide and let's dig in. How do we, right? So
Love it.
I know it seems like a lot for those that are not familiar with E-rate, and this is why you want a consultant, especially if you're a large district, even if you're not a large district, because it seems like a lot, but when you work with a consultant, they know this stuff, you know, in their sleep. And personally, I contact EJ every time I get an email about E-rate and go, okay, what does this mean? Do we mean anything for me? Blah, blah, blah. Because there is a lot to it. And so I don't want people who are watching to think, wow, this is a lot of stuff. It's manageable, and it's managed, especially if you can get a consultant. It is definitely manageable, and it's good for your district. I mean, it's good to jump in and utilize these funds, because that's what they're
Absolutely
there for. I don't know if any of
it typically takes somebody about 3 years to understand the program.
Well, and then they change it.
Well, then they change it.
Then
yes.
they change it. So yeah.
And just for reference, Arizona, just for reference, Arizona is actually pretty good nationally about getting their E-rate funding. We typically get about 60 million per year injected into the state for E-rate funding, and we're usually 10th, 11th, 12th in the country for that. I mean, you're talking about, you know, the Californias, the New Yorks, the Illinois, the Texases that are always up there really high, but we are typically 10th, 11th, or 12th in the country. So we do a pretty good job in this state. There's still more, obviously, that we can get, but we do a pretty good job.
There's a question in chat about where can our accounts payable and accounts receivable staff get trained on these resources on the accounting side. And if you have a consultant, they will come and meet and go over this stuff, right, EJ? Because I know that you've worked with our finance.
We will. And
before.
so the document that that Eddie's referencing there, the E-rate quarterly
Oh,
disbursement reports. So that is a letter, a document that you get at the end of each quarter, or the end of each quarter where you've received reimbursement, and it can be in the form of a discount or a reimbursement. But anyway, it's a letter that outlines what did you receive for those previous 3 months, and it's calendar quarter. It's not fiscal quarter. So January, February, March is quarter one. Those documents, now they used to be physically mailed. Mostly they're physically mailed, I think still, but it can go to any number of people. It is not very consistent, so that's a problem. The mailings can go to, sometimes they come to us as a consultant, sometimes they go to the administrator for the district in the E-rate portal, and it can vary. So we'll get them 1 month or 1 quarter, and then that person will get them the next quarter. Nevertheless, you want to capture those because your auditors will live by those with your E-rate when they audit your E-rate reports. I don't know about where you can get training. I mean, we would certainly help you read them and understand what's in them and make sure that they're accurate. Like I said, you only get a report when you've received funding. So if you didn't get any funding in January, February, March, you're not going to get a Q1 report. You may not know. You may think, I just lost it. Where's my Q1 report? So sometimes, you can ask me, did I get any funding in quarter one? And I can say, no, you didn't. Now, all right, I didn't get a report. So, but that's what they're for. You do want to save them. We typically, as the consultant, we will scan them into an online repository. And then when your auditors come, we just give them a link and they can download anything they want. So that's how we do it. I would recommend doing something similar.
in my experience, and maybe Mark, Nick, and Dave can add to this, it's always good to have one E-rate person, like one E-rate guru or E-rate, the person who's in charge of E-rate. In Dysart, it's me, and it works out well because then I can distribute the information that's needed to the other departments, or I can meet with them, or then I'm the one that's making my requests from our consultants and getting that information back to the people that need to know. But if you have like you're talking about the mail, if you have too many people, then you're going to lose track. And I don't know, you guys, what do you guys think?
Yeah, that's similar for us. In our district, it's kind of a partnership between myself and our finance director. And like Ernie said, there's a kind of a 3-year learning curve. So I'm still in E-rate school, but I've learned so much. And, but just the two of us has been pretty good. You start to get too many people and it can get a little bit confusing. The other thing I just wanted to mention too was that, with this point of when do I file for funding, something that's worked well for us, like Ernie said, you could start in July. That's kind of a crazy time of year. Most people are trying to get schools open and things like that. But that, starting to plan for us, getting our ducks in a row, September, October has been really good, because a lot of these things too will take time. Just, maybe you have to do some internal auditing within your district to count switches or access points and to sort of build your request out. And then another thing that's been helpful is, like Ernie mentioned, there's that 6-week window that you have to put those RFPs out there. We try and get that sort of out before the December break. That's been helpful because typically things kind of, there's like a 2-week break or so where things really slow down in December, the end of December. And so if we can get that out, in the December month, that's kind of nice, because then when we come back from January, it's either just wrapped up or going to wrap up in a week. And then it still puts us in a good spot to do the evaluation and get it all to a board meeting in early March or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with that statement too, is having a key member on your staff, in your district. But I have a question too for you, EJ, is, outside of IT, who are some key stakeholders that you should include in your E-rate process?
Absolutely. So obviously IT is helping determine what it is you need, but this is heavily into procurement. And nothing is more annoying to a business office than to have somebody, sign a contract or go through a procurement without their knowledge. So definitely you want to include them. If you're running a request for proposal, obviously they will need to be involved. So yeah, you want to have a good relationship between finance and IT. They need to be involved, even if they don't oversee or run the procurement. They want to know what's going on and make sure that we're doing everything correctly. So, and from a consultant's point of view, I want everybody involved because I don't want to have that fight at the end of the year. What did you guys do? You did this all wrong. Why did you do it this way? Those kinds of things. So definitely you want to start up front with, when you're assessing your needs, they need to know what your budgets are. They need to know how much discount you're going to get, what it's going to cost them, and they need to understand the procurement process. So yeah, IT, business, we talked about food service, your free and reduced lunch rate. They need to be involved to some extent. We need to make sure those numbers are accurate because that can make a big difference. You can drop down from an 80% to a 60% very quickly if your free and reduced lunch rates go awry. If for whatever reason they're entered incorrectly or you don't get all the applications in, you can lose 20% on your E-rate very quickly in an urban setting. In rural, you do have that 80 to 70 to 60, but in urban, you drop from 80 to 60. So it is an immediate drop. So you definitely want to keep tabs on that and keep them involved. They need to understand what's going on and what's at stake as well.
Okay.
Yeah, let me add to that real quick here. I know that we talked. I know some smaller school districts. A lot of people have to wear a lot of hats or many hats. Us, we're a large district, so we have a lot of people that do certain things. We have purchasing. They handle all our procurement. Like EJ said, there are food service people that are in there as well. We have a grants person that manages all any type of grant. So this kind of falls into that a little bit. So we have somebody that helps with the grants. And then we also have somebody, our CFO is involved in that as well. I think you're talking about, building a relationship with some of those departments. I think it's important that everybody builds a relationship with their CFO, because with that relationship with that CFO, he'll help you dictate or help you. You can justify being able to use our favorite fund 374, right? Because depending on what that CFO's mentality is or what their objective is, they might just say, no, we're going to keep this way and not let you decide what you're going to do with that 374.
Yeah.
Technically, that is, when you really look at it, that is our money, that is our budget, and it is the district's money to use out as they see fit. But as the IT person, we need to lobby and we need to advocate for those funds, because you could repurpose and reuse that money over and over as years come. So you get $1 million back this year, you can use that same $1 million for next year, and just kind of recycle the money and just keep going that way too.
And I want to add on to that, to what Dave says about building those relationships. So like your procurement department, you always want to check, because they have different practices for procurement. Like some might require an RFP, some might require you to use a state contracted. So make sure you're forming that relationship with them, as definitely your CFO, even your accounts receivable, because that's where the 374 comes in. If anything, just make them aware this is E-rate. So they're not getting these checks and going, oh, we have money, we're going to put it here and we'll give it to this person. I mean, you want to make sure you are having these discussions with and free and reduced, our nutrition director, he'll tell me, Diane, it doesn't look like we're getting those forms in. I don't know what's going to happen. So then I kind of have a heads up of, oh no, we might be moving to 60-40 instead of 80-20. And then I'll start, campaigning for those free and reduced forms. I'll talk to the principals or other parents about, hey, we just need to get those forms filled out. So you got to definitely be on it and make sure you're talking to the right people, and make sure that the ones that are involved know what E-rate is, know what it's for, and know that it's yours.
Well, there are some districts that actually, so for their internet budget, they will only budget for their 20 or 10%. And so then in that case, the reimbursements do have to go back to that account in order for it to stay, in the black. So depending on, but that's a discussion you need to have with your finance department is how should that be managed? And a lot of times their internal or the external auditor is the one that's telling them to do that. So.
Right. Yeah. And then that's same with that filing window, because that will determine also whatever your procurement processes are, that'll determine when you should start working on your E-rate, because we've had some years where we had to go out for RFP for internet, and then we've had some years where we didn't. And so we kind of had that double procurement's making us go through RFP, and then we're doing the 4.7. I mean, it was kind of like it takes a little bit more time. So you definitely want to have those discussions with the powers that be to determine when you should start E-rate planning.
Ernie, could you talk a little bit about, with the difference between school sites and non-school sites, just so people understand? I know you can use E-rate for cabling, those kinds of things, I believe, for non-school sites like transportation facilities, but not network equipment and things like that. Could you kind of explain that for folks that maybe don't understand?
Yeah. So the two categories. So what he's talking about is what's called a non-instructional facility, or NIF in E-rate parlance. And that is any building or location in your district that doesn't have student instruction. So a lot of times it is a transportation bus barn. It could be a warehouse. It could be your district office. Category 1 services to those locations, Category 1 is eligible there. You can have a wide area network circuit go to your bus barn. You cannot get Category 2 funding for NIFs, non-instructional facilities, unless it is your district hub. Your internet comes into there, and so now you're putting in equipment that services the entire district, i.e. wireless controllers, firewall, core switches, core router, those types of things. I can't put wireless LAN in my bus barn and get E-rate funding for it because students aren't using it. But I can put a core router in my district office where the internet goes into, because now I'm serving all schools. But that Category 1, a lot of times you don't, if you're not, a lot of times that's not added. So we'll walk into a school district and maybe they have a bus barn, they have a WAN link to it, but they're not getting an E-rate for it. So we'll make sure we add that in. You can definitely do that. Just not all the equipment unless students are using it.
EJ, what about the Category 1? Can I use that for redundancy? Can I get multiple internet service providers by using Category 1, or is that limited?
Redundancy is a 4-letter word in E-rate. There are ways to do it. You don't call it redundancy, you call it load balancing. You can have multiple internet connections. There are some of the larger districts that will have at least two internet connections. They don't have to be in the same building. You can have a high school designated as kind of a disaster recovery site and have a new internet circuit going into that. As long as it's in use, as long as it's not sitting dormant, waiting for you to switch over to it, then you can do it. Now, there are some difficulties in that. If you think about it, if you're doing a procurement and I'm asking for 2 internet circuits, and in my mind, I want 2 separate providers because I want to be as resilient as possible, it's hard for you to justify that. If we look at the business office and you're doing an evaluation, it's hard to say, well, I know these guys were the low cost on both circuits, but I want one of them and one of them. Well, how do I say I want the higher cost without saying because I want it to be redundant? You can't. So if you stagger those contracts, however, or if they're in separate locations, it makes it a little bit easier to justify picking 2 providers. So you have to think about that with the eye on, I'm picking the best value, the most cost-effective solution. But if my end goal is to possibly have multiple providers, you can't necessarily do it all at once and still stay within the rules. But yes, you can have multiple internet providers. You can load balance. You can say, you know, like in some cases, we'll say something like the high schools are going out this, elementaries are going out this circuit, or you can say this is for administrative use, this is for educational use. So you can designate it like that.
And you have to be using it. You can't.
It
sit
has to be in
right.
use. Yes, has to be in use.
So I know
Um,
we want to talk about some things that from our experiences that should probably
Mhm.
be avoided. I don't know if you guys have any, Nick, Mark, or Dave have any stories that I can tell you. I can tell you one of mine is you get very caught up in this 5-year funding, and sometimes you bite off too much that you guys can do if you have a limited
Yeah.
amount of staff. So it's lessons learned. You want to make sure that you're scheduling. You have 5 years, so not to get greedy and try to do all of it in 1 year, because you know what, you're going to run out of time, even with extensions, especially over the past couple of years where parts and things were very hard to get to. That's
Yeah.
one of my lessons learned is, don't bite off too much, because you do have time and you only have a limited amount of staff. So I don't know if you guys have any stories like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'll
kind of
go.
a similar, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just gonna have a similar kind of path, Diana, just with that, and ours was a little more intentional. We just had a little bit of catching up to do in terms of switching over from more like a used gray market model to getting some newer stuff. So we sort of knew we were gonna go through a lot or all of our money early. But the thing that we're feeling right now, especially with the supply and demand issues and just getting stuff, is now we're getting like everything all at once. So the switches and the AP projects all can, so like manpower and how we're going to pull this off is we're starting to feel a little bit of that. But so for the future for us, one of our things we're going to be working on is doing that 5-year, pacing it out. But again, we kind of knew we were playing catch up, so we'll be broke for a little bit while we wait for the next cycle, but we have plenty to do and we'll kind of pace it out. And I think we'll be in a better position to pace it out. And so some folks might be in that position where they do have to play a little bit of catch up if you're trying to kind of get to a certain place.
Right? You don't want E-rate purchased equipment sitting and not being used.
No.
You definitely want to get
Right,
it
you don't.
used
Yeah,
as
so you
soon
get it out as
possible.
fast as
Yes.
possible.
Yes. Dave, did you have something?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just gonna add to that too. So the supply chain didn't help with that, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, I have a master plan for 5 years, and I have it broken up, high schools, junior highs, elementaries, or whatever. But so I would say make sure you have it planned out whatever your cycle is, right? So for us, because we're a large district, it takes a year or a year and a half to get some projects done. So we have it broken up into years. So that helps. But the pandemic, all of a sudden, all my equipment showed up within months from 2 years project. So we were rushing to get that done. So planning that out, right? That's one thing. But then one of the gotchas, I think Emily was asking, what are some gotchas for those that are new? I know that we kind of first started off with saying get a consultant. That was a gotcha for me where, I mean, because if you do it yourself, you can do it yourself. It's doable, but you still have to learn all the rules, right? And if you do one little mistake, and I'm talking if you didn't dot the I correctly, I made one mistake and it cost a little bit because I put the wrong date. That wrong date, it hurt one of the schools that we had funding for, and I couldn't. And even me protesting, it made me say, "Hey, I accidentally put the wrong date." They still said, "Sorry, we're not funding you." So we lost. So just be careful. If you do it on your own, be careful and make sure you do document it correctly, or get somebody like the NICES or somebody to help you with that. That does help a lot because they do it every day. So they get to see it. They're not, because when you're doing it yourself, it was like, how do I do this? Okay, what was that again? So you're questioning yourself. So, okay, hold on. Somebody take over. They're calling me.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Thanks.
So I know I don't know if there's any vendors on this call. I see Mark from Cox is here. So but I do want to say that especially if you're doing it on your own, even if you have a consultant, just be careful. In the beginning, I remember when I was doing it like 20 years ago on my own, I had a lot of vendors contact me and go, "Hey, let me help you write that 470. Hey, let me give you this." And and you're kind of desperate, like, "Yeah, I would love to have that help." Well, no, you don't want that. So especially if you're starting out, just be careful. Because that can get you in a sticky situation.
Yeah, it's very important. One of the very important distinctions is the service provider cannot set the parameters, the scope of work on your Form 470. If they do, they can't bid on it. So you can hire somebody to come in and do an assessment of your network and then say, you need to do this, 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 and this. But then you can't just put that on a 470 directly from their report and have them win the bid. I mean, that's not just E-rate, that's, state procurement. You don't want that. So, yeah, it's definitely something you need to be careful with, but it is difficult, especially if you're in a smaller rural district where you don't have the staff or the knowledge to know what is the latest, greatest thing. Well, this provider is going to come in and say, well, here's the newest thing that you need. Oh, that looks great. Yeah, let's do it. Well, you need to try to get other opinions. Don't just listen to one vendor or even one manufacturer, but bring in other viewpoints and then try to so then you can craft your needs at that point without looking like it was a foregone conclusion that this was the vendor that's going to win this bid.
I just want to preface where Mark, I called you out at Cox. He's never done that. I just want
No, he hasn't.
He's never done that.
No, at least not that I know of.
No.
I think
go
another
ahead.
a lesson learned too is I got to this district I'm currently at, and they were with a consultant that was out of state. So I would say too, a lesson learned is pick a consultant that's in Arizona, like the Nicely's, and they're knowledgeable about what the rules and all of that is, and the compliances that we have to abide by, because they were trying to make us compliant to California restrictions. And I was reading through, and before I got here, they were agreeing to things that made them compliant in California, but not here. So I would recommend that as well as picking a consultant like the Nicely's.
Yeah, and I wanted to be clear. I didn't join onto this to make this an advertisement.
Right.
There are, somebody mentioned before, I think Nan mentioned Mylan Eaton's name and Mala at the libraries. If you have questions, you can go to them and they will direct you to who is available for consultants in Arizona. There are a couple that I would say are reputable. I like Frank out of the Yavapai County, Frank Vanderhorst. The Yavapai County ESA runs their own, and he manages that, and he's pretty good. And we just did have Mojave just had awarded a new contract, which we were fortunate enough to get on it. But so there's other vendors on that contract as well that was just awarded. So, but certainly.
So I know, Laura, we're getting close to time, but EJ, with AST and COSIN in Arizona, we have a lot of members that are rural. We've had some that mention that they do not have a strong infrastructure for network. And then you had mentioned that there is now that program that's come back. Can you explain a little bit more about that, where they can get fiber that no cost to them?
Yeah. Okay. So that's called the State Matching Fund. And so now with the rural school districts, typically you don't need a wide area network if you've only got a single school, but you might have multiple. So if you need to connect your schools via a wide area network, or if you need to bring in higher speed internet that's not available now, you can do a request for proposal, and vendors can bid on it. So they may not be in the area, but they may say, hey, it's going to cost us $700,000 to bring fiber to your school and higher bandwidth. We did this with Grand Canyon. So Grand Canyon ended up getting fiber internet where before they were on like 8 T1s or something like that. That cost, so assume you're an 80% school district, that cost you would have to normally pay 20% of. Now, with the state matching fund, you can apply to have the state cover 10% of that. Or if you're 90%, they would cover 5% of that variance. If you do that, if the state does that, then E-rate kicks in the remainder. So they'll kick in the other 5 or 10%. So essentially, you become a 90% or a 95% school district, and the state and E-rate pay the full construction cost. Now, there are some rules and stipulations about how do I apply for that. You've got to do an RFP that's mandated by Department of Ed for them to dole out that matching fund, they want you to have done an RFP to include everybody in the procurement. And you will have to, you can't simply pick, hey, I want free fiber from these guys, so I'm going to choose them. You have to do your evaluation, assuming no E-rate. So you have to take in the full cost of the construction when you're doing your evaluation. So if you do have an incumbent provider that's providing fiber at a cheaper rate, but you just wanted to go with somebody else, you would have to be able to justify that difference. If they're already cheaper and already there, you can't just pick these guys with the $700,000 because you know it's free to you. So there are some rules about that. But yes, that is definitely a benefit now to try to expand fiber out to the rural school districts. It's not so much for in town because there are plenty of fiber providers in Metro Phoenix or Metro Tucson. So that funding has been earmarked for rural districts.
Where should they go? Like to the USAC website that you had earlier? Or?
You can learn a little bit about that. Again, Mylan Eaton is a good resource for that. He's the one that manages that fund.
Okay.
I will say I didn't want to make this an advertisement. My email address is on there. Anybody, whether they're a client of mine or not, can send me an email and ask me questions. I'll answer the questions for you. We'll talk about it. We'll talk if you want to know what have we applied for in the past. Maybe you're new to the district. I don't know what we're doing E-rate wise. I can tell you that. Don't worry. You know, we're not going to charge you. It's just to talk. So certainly take advantage of that. If you have any questions about what you're doing or what you want to do, be happy to answer them. Now is the time to start planning, but Mylan Eaton is a good resource as well because he manages that fund.
Great.
Eric is putting on some things there too. There are a number of tools available on the USAC website. If you want to just know what it is that you have done in the past, you can download that data on usac.org. So yeah, take advantage of that if you just want to research what have we done in the past.
Donna's got some good questions in here, and it looks like, do we feel like Donna's questions are getting answered as we're chatting?
Where can you find your expenses
in there.
expenses to the 5-year plan?
Yeah, is that a
yeah, so Eric referenced a 5-year budget tool that will tell you what your budget is listed as and what you have spent over the previous well, since 2021 in this case, in this window that we're in right now. So you can certainly use that 5-year budget tool. If you want to actually get a list of the equipment that you have received or that you have applied for, you can find it in that open data. It's a little messy, but there's about 10 different tables in there that you can download information from to view your past filings and the status of your current filings. The E-rate portal, if you have a login to the Epic portal at portal.usac.org, if you've got a login to that, you can certainly look at your past applications and see what's on there. Or if you want to email me and say, I don't know what we've done, can you help me? I can help you. So I can help you see at least what you've done or what you have left.
Diana, I know we're running low on time. We've only got 7 minutes.
Oh.
This has been absolutely fascinating. One of the questions I think, and I don't know if we have time for it. So if we don't have time for it, Diana, stop me and tell me to be quiet. But I know we talk about not only, you know, planning for now, but planning for the future and moving into, Mark, was it you, I think, when we were talking before that talked about like, how do we set up like legacy planning? It might not, I think it was you, Mark, that mentioned it in the past at some point, but what do we think about that as we're moving into the future? How do we make sure that
when we were talking about it, we talked about the veteran CIOs, CTOs that have been doing E-rate for quite a while, and how do we get the next generation coming up and learning the E-rate? Is that the one? I think that's what you're talking about. And
I think that is what I'm talking about. Yeah. And I know like I know you're going to mention it. We have CIO, CTO conversations on Fridays once a month, but what other kind of tools and options do we have as we're moving forward for for people coming in and that are going to be doing this down the road to be, what can we be doing today to be planting seeds for them for the future? I think that's what I'm thinking. We cover that in 3 minutes?
Well, I think that sending them to training, if you have anyone that you feel could be flourishing in E-rate or knowing it, I would definitely be sending them to some of these trainings. ASBO has trainings. The one I think that EJ is doing is for ASBO, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, okay.
There are
so
webinars on the there's webinars on the USAC webpage as well. They're just putting out a new series of training that you can download for there or attend a webinar.
And
And I know that-
definitely, I'm sorry, I was
go ahead,
gonna say, just definitely getting them in on the conversations. I know that when we're planning E-rate, I sit with my network team as well, because they're the ones that are managing the projects once we get approval. But even so, that would help them move up too, you know, into more of a leadership role as time goes on. And it's helpful that they have the E-rate experience. I don't know, Mark, do you or Nick, any?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you can start to cross-train somebody, that's always great. And I think too, just having a really great consultant that's patient with you. So when you are in that, you know, learning stage, you can really just pause and ask questions and just really take that as an opportunity to learn, because I mean, they can just do it all really quickly for you and without you asking all the questions. But I think just having a good consultant that doesn't mind sort of having that teacher's heart, you know, too.
Well, the more you know, the easier my job is. So definitely, we don't want to short you on the details. We want to keep everybody involved. And to your point about cross training, sometimes it helps. And I think Ruben put it in the chat too. When you're having these discussions about what we need, it's helpful to have other people on your staff involved. So, you know, they may not have any idea what it is you're talking about or know how to say this is what we're planning, but they'll as long as they hear the terminology, they understand the timelines, and sometimes they can input and say, you know, we're thinking about doing this initiative. Can we use E-rate funding for it? So ask the questions. Don't ever assume it's not eligible. Ask the questions.
Oh, I like that.
You know, we'll see if we can figure out a way to help use E-rate to help with the funding.
I like that. Don't ever assume it's not eligible. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
and yeah, and always ask the question before you make the purchase, just in case, because of, you know, we've got to go through these timelines. So it's difficult sometimes when we have somebody come to us and say, I just bought a firewall, can I get my E-rate for it? And well, no, because we didn't go through the steps. So yeah, so ask about it, ask the questions.
And I will agree with Emily. She dropped in the chat that the CEDL, the Certified Educational Technology Leader Program, I know that I learned a ton of information about E-rate that I didn't know because I think we began at the beginning with, you know, we don't always know what we don't know. And so the CEDL program really, really supported that. I was lucky enough to go through that with Emily, and we learned quite a bit. So I think that's another really great resource for it. Diana, we are at about 1 minute.
As teacher place for CEDL, so just keep that in mind. Take a look at the website. Another plug I'm going to give is tomorrow, John at Gilbert is hosting our CIO CTO chat. If you haven't registered, there's registration on the AST website. Please do. It's a nice opportunity for CIOs and CTOs to discuss things that are happening right now in our districts, any challenges that we have, any celebrations that we have, and just kind of have a nice low key conversation about what we're all doing and how we can help each other, and just keeping that communication line open. The registration is on the AST website. It is in Gilbert, and there's also a virtual option if you're not able to make it. So if you could spend any time in there, it'd be helpful, because we want to hear from you and have these discussions. So
yes, and it is also in the chat now. I just dropped it.
oh, wonderful.
So you can register there. It is going to be in Gilbert. So come out to the East Valley and hang out on our side of town. Diana, you've got to leave soon, don't you, to get here by tomorrow?
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
I'll be leaving in a little bit.
So we are at 2:59. So I want to say thank you so much to everybody. Dave had to hop off. Thank him in absentia for being with us today. Nick, Mark, can't say enough about how much we appreciate you taking the time to join us and tell some of your stories, and Emily managing chat and being here with us, because I always love seeing you and you joining us. EJ, that was a phenomenal amount of fantastic information. The recording is going to be of enormous value. It'll go on YouTube and be shared on social and on our website soon. Diana, for being an amazing conversationalist and, you know,
And this
just
is a good
getting
time
us
to
going in
bring
the right
up,
direction.
if there's anything else that you guys want to see or hear at our afternoons with ASTI, please just shoot me an email, or Laura, or any of us, so that we can put these together, because we definitely enjoy doing this and having these conversations. And we just, whatever it is that you need information on, we'll get it for you.
Absolutely. We are here. So we are 3 o'clock. We are a hard stop right now. So this is going to be, don't go anywhere yet, everybody, but this is going to be our formal thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm going to stop the recording and in a minute, and that way we will continue to chat for just a couple of minutes. If anybody